Good morning, Kenya. The subject we're dealing with this morning is a subject that we can look at in so many different dimensions. But let me just begin by asking you a few questions. What do you do when your back is against the wall? What do you do when something or someone you have trusted in, maybe depended upon, lets you down? What do you do when you've given everything you have and you discover your very best may not be good enough? In other words, what do you do? How do you stay on top when the bottom falls out? I want to share with you two principles. Two principles that if you took nothing else away from this meeting this morning, you'd walk away with. Principles that I believe will help you to be able to deal with those moments in your life when you find yourself at the bottom. Principle number one is know what you want. Set your eye on a goal and fix yourself on that. Number two, shut out the noise. Shut out the noise. I'm going to share with you two simple stories, two illustrations that bring out these 2 points, and then I'm going to sit down. The first of these stories is a true story, and it's a story that I've shared many times. I've told it so many times that if you have heard me speak, you probably have heard me talk about it. Maybe this will be the last time I'm going to share this story. This is a story about a young man who came to my office one morning. I was sitting in a very busy day. I was preoccupied. There were things going on. I was under a bit of stress. And my assistant walks into my office and says, "Mr. Ondeng, there's somebody waiting to see you in the boardroom." Now, I remember that morning I had told somebody to come by and see me, so I quickly got up, expecting the person that I had had this appointment with. But when I got to the boardroom, standing there was this young man, well-dressed, holding a stack of papers, looking at me. And I said, "What can I do for you?" He said, "Sir, I'm looking for a job." Now, I didn't really have time for that this morning. But I said to myself, here I am. The young man is here. Let's have a conversation. So I told him, "Sit down." So we sat down and I said, "What kind of job are you looking for?" He looked at me and he said, a statement I've heard so many times. "I'm just looking for a job, sir." I said, No. I'm asking you, what are you aiming for? What would you like?" And he looked at me and he said, "Sir, I'm willing to start anywhere." And so I paused and I thought, no, maybe he's not understanding what we're dealing with here. I said, "Young man, I'm not promising you a job. But you know, if there is a job here, it is me who's going to make the decision. What would you like to do?" Again, he looked at me and almost shaking nervously, he said, "Sir, I just want a job." And I remember as our conversation came to an end, thinking to myself, what a tragedy that a generation, and I looked at him representing a whole generation, who was struggling to find something, finding themselves at the bottom of the pile, but unable to articulate what it is that they want out of life. And so opportunities come and whiz by them because they do not know what they want. If I were to meet you in a lift, and we have only 1 minute, would you be able to tell me what it is that you want if I had the power to give it to you? Understand that those who know where they're going are the ones who are likely to seize the opportunities that come. Number two, shut out the noise. Shut out the noise. This illustration I'm going to share with you is obviously not a true story, but it's a story that is one of my favorites. It's a story of a group of frogs that were walking down. Well, frogs don't walk, do they? Frogs were hopping through the forest at the end of a very, very busy day. And they were having a good time, having a chat, as frogs do. And suddenly, 2 of the frogs slipped and fell inside a deep hole. All the other frogs gathered around the hole and they looked down at these 2 frogs. They shook their heads and they said, "This is amazing. They will never get out of this." One frog called a consultant and said, "Take a look at this. What do you think?" The consultant said, "People who have fallen in this pit don't get out. It's deep. They're not going to make it." These 2 frogs looked up And of course, they desired to get out of this hole. And so what did they do? They began to jump. They began to jump. And as they began to jump, the other frogs looked down at them and said, no, you're not going to make it. It's impossible. Have you ever noticed that when you're down in the dumps, when you're down at the bottom, that is when everybody wants to shout at you and give you advice? That is when even the people whose lives are in tatters are looking at you and telling you that you're not going to make it. These frogs looked down and were shouting at their friends to stop jumping because it was a waste of time. At a certain point, the two frogs paused. One of them shook his head, closed his eyes, and he perished. He died. The other frog looked at his friend, he wiped a tear from his eye, and he began to jump. And as he began to jump, the other frogs gathered around the hole again and began to shout at him, do not jump! Stop wasting your time! You'll never make it! That thing is too deep! And the more they shouted, the more he jumped. Stop! And he jumped. Stop wasting your time! And he jumped. And he kept jumping. And finally, with one last kick, that little frog pushed himself and he soared up and he landed next to the other frogs. He was out of breath. He was standing there, breathing like this. And the other frogs all gathered around him, and the chief frog comes up and says, how in the world did you make it out? Why is it that you kept jumping even though we told you it was a waste of time? The little frog looked at them and he said, sir, I'm sorry. I'm deaf. He said, I didn't hear what you were telling me. I thought that you were encouraging me to keep jumping. All this time that you were telling me to stop, I thought you were saying that I should keep jumping. Let me tell you, my friends, you need to learn to shut out the noise. You need to surround yourself with people who tell you that you can jump. And I'm telling you this morning, it doesn't matter how bad it is. Keep on jumping. You're going to make it. You're going to come out of that hole. Thank you.